According to the Food Marketing Institute, between 1975 and 2008, the average number of items on on the grocery store kind of racks went from nearly 9,000 all the way up to 47,000 items. I think that number's probably kept climbing. What do you think? Now, interestingly, we now live in a world filled with choices, don't we? There are tons of choices everywhere, but researchers are starting to believe that actually the number of choices that we have is becoming debilitating. One such researcher says that he believes that there are more people dissatisfied with their purchases today because of what we commonly know as buyer's remorse, right? You get home and whatever it is that you bought, no matter how good it is, don't you ever wonder if the other 20 things on the shelf by the exact same name almost were better than what you have in your basket? Well, interestingly, this kind of has made me think about historically, people worshipped tons of different deities. During the time of Israel, that was very common. They had all sorts of different deities to choose from, and they did. And what ended up happening is they kind of picked it like our normal grocery store here. You just kind of pick and choose which deities you wanted to worship. And I can't help but wonder if part of that was the fact that they, like us, had too many choices and didn't know what to do with those choices. So why not worship everybody? So into that world, right, where everybody worships tons of different gods, and it doesn't really matter, our God, Yahweh, the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, says to his people, me. That's it. And you can understand what a huge difference that is. But the Israelites, they had buyer's remorse. They had one God, and they began to get a little bit tempted about all of the other gods. And this kind of reached ahead during the days of Elijah. When King Ahab married Jezebel. Now, you've heard about Jezebel, but we're not telling stories about Jezebel today, except for the fact that it's Jezebel who brought her God into Israel. And her god was Baal. And Baal worship began to get more and more of a foothold because guess what happened right after she got into Israel? There was a drought. And Baal was the rain god. So, who are you going to think maybe it might be a good idea to start praying to in the middle of a drought? A rain god. And so God sends Elijah with a message. He says, you know what? Here's the deal. I want you to pick a public fight with Baal. And that's exactly what Elijah does. And so that's the story that we're going to read today, is this public fight. And the winner of that fight, we have a lot of fight stuff going on today, don't we? I completely planned that because it's Super Bowl. Not a coincidence at all. And so we are going to go ahead and turn to where we find this battle, this fight for who's going to be the God of Israel, because whoever wins this battle gets to be the God of Israel. And that fight takes place in 1 Kings 18. So if you would do me a favor, grab the Pew Bible in front of you, because we're going to kind of jump through 1 Kings 18 today. It's on page 283. And we're going to begin reading in that right-hand column there under Elijah's triumph over the priests of Baal. And we'll start with verses 21 and read through 24 first. So if you would just follow along as I read. Page 283. Elijah then came near to all the people and said, how long will you go limping with two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. The people did not answer him a word. Then Elijah said to the people, I, even I only, am left a prophet of the Lord, but Baal's prophets number 450. Let 2 bulls be given to us. Let them choose 1 bull for themselves, cut it into pieces and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. I will prepare the other bull and lay it on the wood, but put no fire to it. Then you call on the name of your God, and I will call on the name of the Lord, and the God who answers by fire is indeed God." And all the people answered, "Well spoken." So here we have the fight. The scene is kind of set for us. But as is often the case, there's kind of little pieces that would help us understand what was going on a little bit better. If we understand a little bit more about the culture of the day and what fire meant, as well as a little bit more about Baal worship, you get a bigger picture of what's really going on. So the first thing that kind of helps us understand is that in ancient Israel during this time, fire was the way that a God's presence was made known. So here's really what Elijah is doing. Really what Elijah is doing is going, have him show up, right? You're going to pick a fight, and what's the first thing somebody's got to do if you're going to get into a fight? You got to show up. And that's exactly what Elijah says. Tell him to show up right here. Now that sounds kind of interesting because our God is a God who we believe is everywhere, right? But that wasn't the case in ancient times. Gods could be restricted to certain areas. And so that was kind of part of the fight. See if he shows up. Now, for those who worshiped Baal, choosing to have fire come down was probably a little bit of a silly idea because Baal, as also being the thunder god, was also known as Lord of the Fire. And so it kind of seemed a little interesting, right? It kind of seemed as though Elijah was kind of stacking the odds in favor of Baal. And he's not done stacking the odds in favor of Baal, by the way. But you're picking a fight with someone known as, the Lord of Fire. It would be kind of like picking a fight with someone named Muscles. You're not going to probably win. And so that's exactly what happens. Well, the other thing that helps you kind of understand a little bit better about what's going on is that in order for when fire consumed an offering, it was considered that that God was accepting your petitions, accepting your offering, and would do whatever it is that you asked. So each group is going to lay a bull down, and what they're really saying is, send rain. Send rain, God. That's what they're going to start praying. Send rain, God. Please show that you are God and send rain. And if you're going to send rain, burn this puppy up so that we know that it's you. And so that's really what they're asking to do. Now, do you begin to kind of see what God is doing? We have a really awesome God. He's kind of smart. It's like he's all-knowing sometimes. You see, if rain had come before this public fight, who was going to get the glory? Whoever you wanted, right? Whoever you wanted. You got to pick who you thought sent it. He's going to pick a fight before the rain ever starts, and then whoever wins is the one who's going to really get the glory. And so we see the scene set, right? And so what happens is, and we're not going to read the first part of it, but what happens is Elijah goes, go for it, guys. And it's early in the morning, and they start dancing, much like we saw this morning, I imagine. They start dancing around the altar, and they start crying out to their gods, and nothing happens. And about noontime, after they've been doing this for several hours already, Elijah comes over, and he says this, and it says that he says this in a mocking kind of a tone. Cry aloud. Surely he's a god. Either he's meditating, or he's wandered away, or he's on a journey, or perhaps he's asleep and must be awakened. Now here's a funny thing about that. Even though the scriptures say that Elijah used kind of a mocking tone and he said it with a mocking voice, the mythology about Baal says that Baal actually did all of those things. So I kind of find it a bit amusing that here Elijah's using a little bit of tongue in cheek. Like, you say your God meditates. You say that your God goes to sleep. Maybe he's doing those things. And nothing happens. And so, the priests, they step it up a little bit more. And it wasn't uncommon during the day to start self-inflicting wounds in order to cry out to your gods. And that's exactly what they started doing. And they get kind of even more ramped up and more anxious, and nothing is happening. So at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is when the evening sacrifice is, Elijah is done. He's given them most of the day, and he is finally at the point where he's going to come forward. And we find his words to the people on that next page. So if you want to turn the page to 284, we're going to read verses 30 through 35. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come closer to me." And the people came closer to him. First, he repaired the altar of the Lord that had been thrown down, most likely because Jezebel was getting rid of all of the altars for our God. And Elijah took 12 stones. Interesting, 12 stones. According to the number of tribes of the son of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord came, saying, "Israel shall be your name." With those stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and then he made a trench around the altar large enough to contain 2 measures of seed. And next he put wood in order, cut the bull in pieces, and laid it on the wood. He said, "Fill 4 jars with water and pour it on the burnt offering and on the wood." Then he said, "Do it a second time." And they did it a second time. And he said, "Do it a third time." And they did it a third time. So water ran all around the altar and filled the trench also with water. I'd like to begin by saying, Dave, thank you for not including that part of the story this morning. Because if you think that we don't really want fire in the sanctuary, I can guarantee you water all over our floor is no more exciting. But can you see how stacked this really is looking? You've picked a fight with the Lord of Fire. You've asked him to bring it down. There are 450 priests dancing around the altar over here. And there is Elijah over here. And now, as though that's not enough, you have to rebuild the altar to your God. And then you by yourself are going to drench it with water in the middle of a drought. And then ask your God. Now, can you imagine standing there that day? You can almost go, guys, I think he's lost it. I think he's lost it, because there is no way that after all of that, this is going to turn out well. And then Elijah steps forward, and he offers his petition to God. At the time of offering of the oblation, the prophet Elijah came near and said, "O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your bidding. Answer me, O Lord, answer me, so that this people may know you, O Lord our God, and that you have turned their hearts back." Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt offering, the wood, the stones, and the dust, and even licked up the water that was in the trench. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, "The Lord indeed is God. The Lord indeed is God." You know, the winner of the battle is pretty obvious immediately. God had reclaimed his kingdom for a while. Now, if you've been around for a few weeks, and you know that this sermon series is on the character of God. So the question is, what does this tell us about the character of God? And what does it mean then for us to reflect that character in our lives? To get to that, I want to read you Exodus 34:14. This passage comes after Moses has come down the mountain, found the people worshiping a gold calf, and then God renews his covenant with his people, and he says this, "For you shall worship no other God," right? And that's what the people were doing in 1 Kings. "You shall worship no other God, because the Lord, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Now, I didn't want to start off today today we're going to talk about God is jealous, because what happens when you hear the word jealous? We have that negative connotation with jealous. If you've ever heard God referred to as jealous, doesn't it kind of leave that almost sour taste in your mouth? You don't usually go, tell me about some of your character traits. Well, I'm jealous. And proud of it. But think about what jealousy really is. And I think that this is where the scripture writers, where the authors, what they were really trying to help us understand. And that is, isn't jealousy really about knowing what's yours? Jealousy is really about saying, this is what's mine. That is what's yours. Now take that into the story of God. You see, God had invited Israel into a relationship with him, and they had said what? You will be our God, and we will be your people. They had given themselves over to that kind of a relationship over and over and over again. They were God's people. So all God is simply saying is this: give me what's mine. You're mine. You are my people. Be faithful to me, because that is what you said. And that's all that it means that God is jealous, is God knows that we're his. We're on this side of the cross, which means God knows we were bought with the blood of Jesus. God knows that you and I belong to him, and he is simply saying, give me what's mine. So what does that mean for us as believers? Now, for those who don't know yet, what it means is our God is jealous for your affection when you don't know him. Our God says, you're mine, and I bought you, and I want you to know that. And he calls us back to him. But for those of us who are believers, does that mean that we get to turn our back on what it means to have a jealous God? Now, maybe it's just me, but sometimes I kind of give God a run for his money. Sometimes I find other things to put in the way. Sometimes I find other things to worship. And I'm sure, again, I'm the only person here who does that, so you're safe. But maybe for one or two of you who need to know examples of my life, maybe it's things like relationships. I can hold relationships up and worship relationships. I can worship success. I can worship addictions. I can worship things in my life that I put in the place of God and say, even though I'm supposed to be about you, maybe this time I'll get what I need from something else. Now here's the incredible thing about the character of God, and here's where it comes back to us and how we live out our lives. I truly believe that God's willing to pick a fight with whatever it is that you've put back up on that altar. He'll do it. You want to say that in your life relationships mean as much as me? Put it on the altar. Let's see what happens when you ask whatever it is in your life to do what it is that I'm supposed to do for you. You put your success on that altar right next to me. And you ask which one's going to make you happy. Which one's going to be the life that I've called you to live. You put whatever it is that you turn to cope with all of the stress in your life. Put that up next to me. And which one provides you with the life that you were called to live? We have a God who's like, go for it. Because I don't know about you, but every time I've put something on that altar, it's as though fire comes down, and it's that obvious. And I find myself again saying, why do I even get into this fight? So for us to live out the character of God as jealous, I think we have to be willing first to own what it is in our lives that he's being jealous about. I wonder if you'd be willing to do that. It's not fun. It's kind of fun to have those kind of things. But it also doesn't work. People let you down. Success is temporary. Are you willing to put whatever it is on that altar today? Say, show me again, God. Show me again why it's you I worship. Amen.